What will Bitcoin be worth in 2023? Today I want to give you 3 factors that will help you to determine the possibilities and the probabilities of where the price of Bitcoin will go this year. And stay tuned to the end because I'm going to show you a way to profit whether Bitcoin goes up or goes down. Let's get started. This is Crypto Intel. I'm Max, your host. And what I want to do is start first with looking at price action. The first factor is, what does the past cycles tell us about this cycle and about where the price of Bitcoin will go? So let's look here. Let's first go to the 2018 high. The blue line here is the high of the this is the 2013. Let's start here. So in 2013, the high of Bitcoin was at $1,245. Okay, the halving came in July of 2016. So what happened was that we had a high in December of 13. We had a low. It went down. It went from $1,250 roughly down to about $200. We went up, and then we went back down and tested the low. Now the key question is, what happened after we tested the low? Because what I'm going to show you is that in the cycle previous to this cycle and in this cycle, the same rough thing happened. We had a low, we went up, we had another low, and then we started the real bull run, you can see here. So between the second low, or the test of the low, how far did Bitcoin go up? This can give us an idea of where the price might go this year. So let's take a look in the 2015-2016 cycle. We're going to go from the second low and we're going to go up to where the halving is. And you see right there, that's about 350%. So in the year before the halving, we went up about 350% from the second time, or from the test of the low of the cycle. Now let's look at the last cycle. The last cycle was in 2017, 2018. The high right here came in the beginning of 2018 in January at about $20,000. We had a low down to about 3,100. Then we went up, and then we tested the low again right here. Same thing as in the previous cycle. Now, between the test of the low and the halving, how far did it go up? Let's look here. About 179%. Now, this of course was COVID, so it went down pretty low. It might have, if COVID didn't happen, if that black swan didn't happen, then maybe it wouldn't have gone as low. But we still had a pretty good increase, about 181% increase. Okay, from the second low to the halving, which happened in May of 2020. So the second low was in March of 2020. So now let's look at our cycle right here. So we had our high is right here, around 71,000. We've had a low already. Now the question is, will we go back down and test it? We probably will go somewhere between 24 and 16,000 to test it. But if we do, the next halving is in around, I think, May of 2024 right here. So the question is, will we go up about as much? So in the previous cycle it was 181, and in the cycle before it was 350. So you see the amount that we're going up is reducing. That's usually the case in these kinds of assets. But let's say it goes up about half again, which would be about 90%. If we take it from, roughly where it might go, I think the probabilities are it might dip down maybe into the low 20s. But let's go 100% from there. And that'll take us to around 40,000. So that's one possibility. According to the past priced action, we can see from the prior two 4-year cycles that Bitcoin goes up. In one case about 200%, in one case about 300%, And I'm going to say this time it might be about 100%. This is just roughly. This will give you an idea of what I think is most probable to happen. Now, there are some factors that can influence where the price goes, okay? Past action is one. The second factor is the micro. So, I'm sorry, the macro factors. And these are a couple of things. But before I get to that, let's also take a look at Bitcoin and its correlation to the stock market. So, there's a lot of talk about this going around, but, most analysts agree that Bitcoin is relatively correlated to the NASDAQ. And you can see here, if you look on the daily chart, I can draw a line. Oh, let me just get here. I can draw a line like this. On the Bitcoin chart, you can see it goes up. And again, I'm just doing this roughly. And then it's coming down. Now, today it had a big jump, and I'll get into that in a second. But you can see it's roughly similar to what's happening in the NASDAQ. Goes up, goes up. Let's do it again, and then goes down. It's roughly similar. So what this means is that on a macro scale, if the stock market has a big dip, has a crash, something happens, Bitcoin is probably going to get affected too. So that could be a factor in where the price goes this year. All right. There's a couple of other things that are different than previous cycles. In previous cycles, we didn't have inflation. Okay. Inflation was under 2% for the past 10 years or so. So what we can see is that in this cycle, inflation, of course, has been going up, but in the past, since the past year, inflation has actually been coming down again. Now, it could go up again, because in past inflation cycles, we've seen double tops in inflation, where it goes down and then it comes back up. That is a possibility, all right? But most independent inflation experts feel that inflation is coming down, and it'll probably stay down because of a number of different factors. But that is something to look at. This is the True Inflation website here. A good one to see what the difference is between what the US government reports as inflation, which is a 3.2%, and what the latest data tells us about where inflation is. The government uses data from looking back at data, whereas Trueflation looks at more current data to give you a better idea. But in either case, it looks like inflation is coming down. Now, why is that important? It's important because what inflation does determines what the Fed does in terms of interest rates. And if interest rates are high, then there's less money that can go into assets. Now, a third macro point to keep in mind is that there are some regulatory headwinds around that can still affect the price of Bitcoin. The SEC has sued Binance, Coinbase, and a couple of other companies, saying that they are trading in securities when they're not supposed to be doing that. So that can affect the price of Bitcoin. But there has been some developments that might have the SEC easing a bit on these types of headwinds. One is that Grayscale, which applied for an ETF to the SEC and was denied, filed a lawsuit, and the lawsuit said that the ETF, the SEC's decision to reject the Grayscale Bitcoin ETF on the grounds that it was arbitrary and capricious in its ruling. So that what they're saying basically is that the SEC rejected its GBTC application on the grounds that the products were not designed to prevent fraudulent and manipulative acts and practices. And that decision was overturned. And basically what they're saying is that if there's a futures ETF for Bitcoin, which there is and which was approved, then you can't say that a a spot ETF would be any more fraudulent or being able to be manipulated. So this is a good sign. This means that the SEC has to go back to the drawing board, and there's much more of a chance that an ETF will be approved. So what happens is that let me just go here. The other headwind is the lawsuit against Binance, and you can see here that the SEC accused Binance of mishandling funds, lying to regulators. And so this is another lawsuit that has to kind of go through the courts. Binance, though, is a big deal. Binance, as you can see here, in terms of trading volume, Binance is over $5 billion, $6 billion every day being traded. And the nearest exchange that deals with crypto is Coinbase, which is not even at 1 billion. So, for Binance to have a big effect from the SEC, that could put a damper on the prices as well. These are all things that you need to keep in mind. Now, the third factor, we've talked about price action from the past. We talked about the macro influences. The third factor is what I call the swans. Binance being sued by the SEC and by some other governmental organizations, that can be a black swan. If Binance gets closed down, there's a lot of trading volume that has to go to all these other exchanges, and that can put a damper on prices, as I mentioned before. Another black swan could be something happening in the economy. As we said, how the regular stock market goes, so does Bitcoin. If something crashes the stock market, if there's a recession, if there's a banking crisis, if there's a problem in, say, commercial real estate, all these things are possibilities that can affect the price of the greater stock market as a whole, and also Bitcoin. So those could be black swans that happen that can affect the price, that can lower the price. And then there's white swans too, one of which is an approval of an ETF. So if the SEC approves an ETF by the end of the year, that can really spike up prices. And with this lawsuit being in favor of Grayscale, the chances of an ETF being approved are a little bit higher for 2023. That means if an ETF is approved, and we'll go into this more in detail in a later video, but if an ETF is approved, a lot of money that's on the sidelines can flow into Bitcoin, and that can raise the price up. Okay, so finally, let's just talk about the one thing that you can do, whether the market goes up or down. And that one thing is dollar cost averaging. You might have heard of this, but basically what it is if you were to just take a set amount of money and every week or every month or every other day invest it in Bitcoin, you will benefit by the fact that Bitcoin for the past 9 years has always been an up to the right asset. It's always been going up. And let's just take a look at that real quick here. Let me move this out of the way. Let's say you want to accumulate Bitcoin for 8 years, and you started just 8 years ago. You just put $100 every week into Bitcoin. Well, what would happen is that you would now be up over 1,000% on your investment. You started with 41,000. You'd have 480,000 at this point, even though Bitcoin has gone from a high of around 70,000 all the way down to where it is now at around 28,000 or so. So you see that if you, and you can play around with this is DCABTC.com. You can play around with it to see what would happen if you invest in Bitcoin going forward. But doing DCA is one of the easiest and safest ways to invest in Bitcoin and be assured that whether Bitcoin goes up or goes down, you're going to be there for its appreciation. That's all for today. I'll see you in the next video.